Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 30, Mental Health Services Protection Act. Adjourned debate. Ms. Goodrich.
The honourable member for Calgary West.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much for allowing me to speak to the Mental Health Services Protection Act. I rise on this bill number 30. There's a lot to be said in regards to this particular bill, and certainly I believe that regarding structure and importance of a bill of this magnitude, I certainly understand the importance of it, but it certainly is, without doubt, complex. Now, our health critic has done very much due diligence in reviewing this bill, and that's not easy in this assembly, where bills sometimes are introduced very quickly and swiftly through the House, which obviously to me has always been a bit of a concern, especially when there's always these we'll call it possible unintended consequences when bills come in and out so quickly, which is why it's always important to consult with the necessary stakeholders either before or certainly if anything was ever referred to a committee, then you really have the opportunity to bring in those necessary stakeholders in order to assist with strengthening a bill of this magnitude. I have a few stories I wanted to touch base on, and I will get to certainly my notes on this. But there's so many fields that this particular bill touches on when it comes to counseling and people who are peer supports and advocates and people that provide spiritual faith guidance, as an example, rehabilitation, problem solving. I mean, there's, I'm certainly, again, as my former career, and I've stated before, I mean, I'm certainly for, structure and understanding that there's an accountability portion to anything, really, that we do. But I certainly do have a concern. I think questions that I think will be reasonably brought up in committee of the whole, which of course has to do with those people that do peer support, and many of who do that are at one point in their time former victims of addiction, some of whom are themselves going through the process. I myself have an acquaintance who was a constituent who's reached out to me, and we've stayed in touch over the last 4 or 5 years. His name is Sheldon. He's a very nice young man. He's one of these fellas that had a great job, had a beautiful family, had the house, had the car, had everything going for him. But sadly, he had fell into the depths of addiction and that drug abuse, and lost it, lost everything. And when I had the fortune of in this House passing Bill 205, the pill press bill, and the work that I've done in regards to the fentanyl crisis, he had reached out to me. And over the last few years, obviously, he's been struggling in order to find work and work in a field that obviously he had been in before, which I believe was some of the oil and gas industry, which sadly for him he's been unable to find over the last several years. But through conversations I've had with him, he's trying to get involved in helping others, addictions. Now he himself struggles, right? However, on a positive note, he always tells me and updates me as to how often he remains clean and sober, which I think is very important and a struggle that many of these people have to go through every day. But what I love about him is his enthusiasm to help others, and it has become very infectious. We had great discussions regarding the fentanyl crisis. We talked about the cocaine addictions, the crack addictions, the crystal meth addictions, obviously the fentanyl, carfentanil, heroin, all of these drugs that have sadly plagued our society. And he sent me a note not too long ago, and he was really excited that he was getting an interview to be for an addictions advocacy group for people on active addiction. And they're very much about harm reduction. It's very much harm reduction based. But he's doing this not because of his we'll call it qualifications in the oil field. He's doing this because of his experiences as an addict and what he has overcome in order to help others, help guide them. And one of the things that I've certainly experienced in my time, again, dealing with people with mental health and addictions, and I guess we'll stay on the addictions topic at the moment. But when you're trying to help somebody with that addiction, a lot of times the respect comes from those who have walked the walk and talked the talk. And not everything can be derived, from the person who has that doctorate in the field of whether it be counseling or addictions. However, sometimes the best experiences and the best help can come from those who are in the peer support area. So I certainly, as we relate it back to this, the bill, which has to do with the Mental Health Services Protection Act, certainly those, again, who have the experiences that I think that provide huge value to those people who are going through the addictions themselves currently. I think I wouldn't want to see them prohibited in any way from helping people that are going through those struggles. And we can include, of course, the mental health portion of things as well, Madam Chair. So anyway, he provides what I consider to be a huge value, and I wouldn't want to see him or anyone like him having any sort of barrier to prevent them from helping others who are also going through any form of mental health and addictions struggle. And I think of another lady who's reached out to me, and she herself was an addict. Sadly, one of her kids became an addict who became very much lost within the system. But again, somebody that I have maintained contact with over the last several years, and I'm proud to say that she's a very vibrant lady who's really pulled things together, and she is providing support and helping people who are also going through mental health and addictions issues, and while doing that, she is providing support for her daughter, who herself has become a mother, and I think it's important that she be allowed to continue her work that she's doing as a peer support for people, not only in the community but within her own family. Now, as I worked, Madam Speaker, as I worked downtown, and I worked downtown for about this is in Calgary, of course, for about 2.5 years, and then I also worked as a judicial interim release hearing officer in the jails for also, again, 2.5 years. And I dealt with many people. I would say almost, well, pretty much the vast majority of them had mental health or addictions issues. And, you know, I saw the benefits that places such as the Mustard Seed, the Center of Hope, or some of the other ones that were downtown, the Salvation Army, as an example, even one of our detox areas in Calgary, we call it the Alpha House. You know, many of these people that are there working there, you know, they do what they can to help people. And they provide coaching and again, that peer kind of support. And some of them themselves had been, you know, in the system, and you know, they've lifted themselves up through the assistance of others, where they've got a job, again, helping others. So I certainly wouldn't want to see any sort of a barrier for them in regards to this bill. And, you know, as my friend and colleague from Fort McMurray had indicated, I mean, this is a very complex bill. And I think it's important that you know, that we have the ability to analyze all components of it, to make sure that there are no unintended consequences, and that there is achievable buy-in from all stakeholders involved. Because again, in Alberta specifically, and every jurisdiction has little different nuances, there is so much good work being done by so many different organizations that I would not want to see any one of those good things being done by people from northern Alberta to central Alberta to southern Alberta that may have an unintended consequence of somehow being precluded from doing the good work that they're doing because of a bill that may not have been thoroughly thought out. So again, Madam Speaker, you know, I'm certainly appreciate the bill that's coming in. I understand you know, the structural component. I certainly want to make sure that people themselves have you know, I think that there has to be some form of structure, that there has to be consequences, sort of as part of making sure that not just anybody, I guess, can do this. However, we also must appreciate and understand that those services that are being provided throughout Alberta, there's just so much great stuff, and I just wouldn't want to see anybody that's precluded from doing some of the great stuff that they're doing. And if I may add, you know, what I've found too is you know, when we're talking about you know, essentially maybe a college that's potentially being created. You know, we have to understand the nuances of the people who face sometimes these mental health and addictions problems, and some of them, sadly, in the throes of their addictions, have fallen into trouble with the law, and some of them may have criminal records, and I certainly wouldn't want to see any of them precluded from doing the good work that they're doing as they've turned their lives around in order to help others within the community. And Madam Speaker, I think I just would like to add maybe a story that really just comes to mind from a gentleman that was downtown in Calgary, and sadly I think he's still on the streets of Calgary, and this is going on probably about 15, at least 15 plus years now. And this is a gentleman that sadly fell into the throes of schizophrenia. You know, I myself had dealt with him. Thank you.
Questions or comments under Standing Order 29-2A? Hearing none, any other individuals wishing to speak to the bill? Honourable Member for Airdrie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise today to speak to Bill 30, the Mental Health Services Protection Act. Madam Speaker, there's two parts to this bill. I think it's important to recognize that. And the one part being the piece around the licensing of treatment facilities, and then the second piece being around the creation of the college. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to see, especially in addition to my comments from this morning in regard to the PCHAD legislation, that there is some action being taken by this government in regards to improving mental health services in this province. Madam Speaker, I have a constituent named Mike. Mike is constituent in Airdrie, born and raised Airdrie. We actually grew up together, and Mike went through significant battle with mental health and addictions. And you will if you ever have the opportunity to meet Mike, Mike has become this fantastic advocate in our community and this wonderful speaker. He does this spoken word piece, and he does it in various avenues throughout the community, but he's recently started to go into the schools and speak to those high-risk youth in our schools about the life he's lived. And how he got there, and the challenges that he has, and the challenges that he still currently faces. And he's wonderfully open about it, and he's making such a difference and having such an impact on the people that meet him everywhere he goes. Madam Speaker, Mike was actually recently the recipient of the Lieutenant Governor's True Grit Award, and I know I wrote a letter of recommendation for him to the Lieutenant Governor, and I know a number of community leaders in the City of Airdrie also very proudly spoke for him in regards to winning this award. He is an individual that is unforgettable, and I truly believe that he is changing lives in a way that most people will never be able to. Madam Speaker, he is everywhere in our community. He is just this fall completed the 4th annual Unmasking Mental Health event in Airdrie that brings families together around Halloween time, and they dress up, and Spider-Man always comes, and there's face painting and lots of candy, and it's a great event, and he raises money for various charities in our community. And he does so with a smile on his face. And this year was particularly challenging for him because he was receiving his True Grit Award on Friday here in Edmonton, and then Saturday was his event that's becoming quite a large event in Airdrie, but he was able to manage those things and be very successful at that and get it done despite the freezing cold weather that happened at that time. So Airdrie's pretty proud of Mike and the work that he's doing in our community, Madam Speaker. But Mike never went to post-secondary education. He doesn't have a degree, and yet he's having an impact on so many different people, young people, high-risk youth, adults who are battling addiction. And this is a guy that you can phone at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he will answer the phone, and he will come over and he will talk to you. He saved many lives, Madam Speaker. I know that Mike has been to houses at 2 o'clock in the morning for friends that were trying to kill themselves, Madam Speaker. And Mike has been there, and Mike is able to have these sort of real-life conversations with these people that are impacting their lives, and they're saving lives, and it's just absolutely wonderful to see. And I'm so honored to know Mike and to hear the work that he's doing in our community, and not just from him, but you hear it from everybody else. So my concern, Madam Speaker, with this legislation is, does this limit Mike's ability to be able to help those around him? Does this limit his ability to, and the ability of others to participate in peer support groups, peer support settings, unfacilitated? I would have some questions surrounding a lot of those things. I know a great man in this province. His name is Theo Fleury. He's a former hockey player for the Calgary Flames, Madam Speaker. And there's many in this province that know him and his story quite well. And Madam Speaker, he facilitates these peer support groups. And I have yet to actually see in this legislation if this is now going to be shut down, and that's the concern that I have. Will Mr. Fleury and will Mike and Airdrie still be allowed to run these groups that are having an impact? I've been able to participate and just sit in the corner and see and hear what this is doing in people's individual lives. So, Madam Speaker, I do think of Theo and Mike when we talk about this type of legislation, and that needs to be addressed by the government. Absolutely, Madam Speaker, and I'm certain that the Minister of Health will hopefully respond to 29.2a and address those concerns for myself and for my colleagues and for Mike and for Theo and for many others who are making a difference in our communities in that regard. Madam Speaker, as you may know, there are many former addicts that are the ones that are paying it forward and facilitating these types of activities. And if this legislation hampers that in any way, shape, or form, we are doing a disservice to those in the industry and to those that struggle with addictions and mental health, Madam Speaker. And I don't think that's the intent of this House, but that does need to be addressed, because we are at crisis levels in our province when it comes to help. Whatever you might call it, you can trauma specialists on this end that have really specific training, Madam Speaker, and then there's Mike, who helps people, and there's AA, Madam Speaker, Alcoholics Anonymous. Those are people that have just been through it, that have come together to support each other, and it works for a lot of people. A lot of these peer support groups work for a lot of people, and this is the point I'm trying to stress here today. So I hope that the government can address that for me as we move forward, Madam Speaker. I do have some concerns around the process for treatment facilities. And sort of the red tape and the regulation that could bog down these very, very slim financial operations that we know don't always have the manpower or the dollars to get this paperwork done. Is this going to bog them down? I actually think it's very important to have quality when it comes to treatment of mental health and addictions, Madam Speaker. And I applaud the government for addressing that, but there are some concerns for a lot of these organizations that that deliver these services that do not have the ability to hire somebody to do the paperwork. And so what does that look like? And I think there's a lot of questions that these organizations have around that. So those are some of the things I would address here in second reading of Bill 30, the Mental Health Services Act, and I ask that that the government consider Mike and consider Theo and people like them that are doing good work in our communities, and hopefully not limiting their ability to pay it forward and to give back and to make a difference and to save lives for our constituents and the people in our communities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Understanding Order 29-2A, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I did respond to some of the same line of questioning last night, but I'll be happy to do so again today just to provide that clarity and assurance that this is in no way about peer support programs or other types of programs where they aren't indeed selling themselves as counseling therapists or addiction counselors. And definitely 12-step programs, peer support programs, whether they're faith-based or not, such as AA, as is being mentioned, or NA, operate outside of residential treatment facilities and operate outside of classifying themselves as health professionals. They are certainly providing a service that is health-related, but they're doing it from a position of lived experience, and we really want to honour their expertise, and this is in no way to limit that. This is about providing the assurance to people that are often in some of their most vulnerable positions when they're reaching out for help, living through substance use issues and asking for help for themselves or for a child or another loved one, for example, Madam Chair. And it's Speaker, it's incredibly important that we give them the assurance for somebody to call themselves a therapist, that they have to actually have some kind of oversight, training, and expertise through a college. The other piece that it does, of course, is by bringing people who are counseling therapists or addictions therapists under a college, is it creates that assurance to the public that they are held to a high standard around things like the bill we just passed earlier this session around protecting patients from sexual assault, sexual misconduct, and being able to revoke a license for somebody to practice in that field if they've engaged in any of those inappropriate behaviors. Today, if that's the case with somebody who calls themselves a therapist, we don't have those tools. By passing this legislation, there will be oversight, there will be protection, and that's important for patients. And it will indeed not impact services that are provided through peer support and mentoring, as is so important and is mentioned by the Honourable Member and many others. So I just wanted to give that extra clarity, that this is not about peer mentors. This isn't about people with lived experience who provide an important service to their community and to help people living through their substance. This is about people who call themselves addictions counselors and making sure they're held to a high standard, and making sure, or addictions therapists as well, making sure that they're held to a high standard, that they're working with the public in a way that we would all be proud of, and if they're not, that they don't have the ability to continue doing that work. Madam Speaker, thank you.
Audrey?
Just a follow-up question, and I'd seek clarification. The creation of the college and those that are regulated under that, this may not be a question that you can answer, but when a college is created for third-party insurance purposes to be eligible, there needs to be a college and a number that insurance companies can process. Which is great. I actually think that's a good step forward to improving access to quality mental health treatment, and will address a number of various concerns, because financial barriers are certainly one of those, and there are many with third-party insurance that would like to access a marriage counselor, addictions counselor, those types of things, and may be able to do so with the creation of the college. Have you had any conversations with third-party insurance companies or the college themselves? Will this be a further step down the line that is considered, or speak to that, please?
Thank you, Honourable Member, and College hasn't been created yet because this is an area where there is no existing college or oversight per se, that we aren't in a position to be able to liaise with them on those questions. But should the bill be passed, then regulations will be created to support the creation of a college, and those are the exact kind of things that that government, the college, and the people of Alberta can work through. And it usually takes about a year to set up a college from scratch, so these are the kinds of questions that we worked forward to make sure that we not only protect patients but also find ways to increase access. Thank you.
Airdrie?
I still have time. Have you or will you, or is there any response from particularly Alberta Blue Cross that this is something that they're considering or see as a good step forward? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and Blue Cross, through the government programs that are public access programs, definitely we work with them on making sure that we have a good scope of services available. And then with private insurers, of course, they have a responsibility to the owners of those plans to make sure that they consult with them on those pieces. But I regularly meet with Blue Cross and so do officials from my department to talk about the public plans and the. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak to the bill? Seeing none, the Honourable Minister to close debate.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to my colleagues for their engagement in this important discussion. When Albertans access substance use treatment or mental health services, they should absolutely feel safe in doing so. And Bill 30 aims to ensure that Albertans are able to access these professional mental health care services in a safe, regulated environment. We've heard this call from many in the field. Focused consultations were held in the summer in both Edmonton and Calgary, and there was an online survey available to members of the public in addition to that. And of course, there are many very well-run facilities with dedicated caregivers throughout our province, and for them, this bill will formalize standards and policies that already exist. It's important, I think, that workers be recognized and have the recognition of their expertise. Albertans have needed this kind of help and have shared stories about facilities that offered services of questionable value, in some cases were even unsafe. And at the announcement, we referred to the 2007 fatality of Taylor Argent. Taylor was a young man, a very young man, who, after struggling with his substance use, his family admitted him to a facility that they assumed had safeguards, oversight, and protections. What happened to Taylor at that facility was heartbreaking. He consumed a poisonous substance and was, because it was stored unsecurely, in an unlocked shed, and he suffered for many hours before he was finally taken to hospital and later died. In 2010, there was a fatality inquiry by Judge Hunter, and it recommended that government set up minimum standards of care at these facilities and that they be licensed and inspected on an ongoing basis. These recommendations were ignored by the government of the day and by successive Conservative governments as well. And in 2018, we decided that it was very important that we act on this. We committed to introduce legislation in our throne speech to ensure safety, quality care at private treatment facilities, and we're proud to deliver on that promise for the Argent family and for every Albertan who accesses this kind of care. We do this because we know how important it is for Albertans to trust that they will receive quality services from appropriately trained professionals in a safe environment. So I have to say that I wish this legislation was passed in 2010 following the fatality review. I actually wish it was passed before 2007, before Taylor was in this facility and any other person who suffered in an unregulated environment and assumed that there were these protections and safeguards. But I am very proud that our government is taking action to make sure that this can't continue, that we protect those who are accessing services in these facilities and in other areas in the community. And I'm very grateful that that so many members of the public and people who work in these fields have reached out to us to work with us through this process and make sure that we have the very best protections for patients and that we make sure that Albertans get the kind of care and assurances that they deserve. So thank you, honourable colleagues. Look forward to this bill proceeding.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Acadia has moved second reading of Bill 30, Mental Health Services Protection Act, on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Health. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for second reading? Say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion is carried.
Bill 30, Mental Health Services Protection Act, is now read a second time. Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 32,